$3 million versus $5. That's the cost comparison between Russia's interceptor missiles and the simple corner reflectors Ukraine used to spoof them. But money isn't the only imbalance. The tactic exposed a psychological and digital blind spot in modern air defense networks. We'll uncover how a few shimmering decoys forced Russia's systems into an unwinnable cat-and-mouse game, and what that means for every military now relying on radar. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How do 4 slow, propeller-driven drones break through the same radar web designed to stop hypersonic missiles? Early that morning, as the air over western Russia sat cold and flat, 4 Ukrainian Beaver drones began moving toward Moscow at 380 kilometers per hour. Their composite bodies reflected almost no radar signal, and their noise was so low that even nearby villages barely noticed the faint buzzing. On the radar scopes of the S-400 operators, the shapes blending across the display looked harmless, so harmless that the automated filters labeled them avian clutter. The system had learned to ignore small irregularities that fluttered or drifted unpredictably. That habit would cost them dearly. The S-400 network was among Russia's most trusted air defense layers. Each radar array spun inside its protective dome, scanning hundreds of kilometers in every direction, painting the skies with electronic pulses tuned to detect the heat and movement of fast, heavy aircraft. It was designed to track ballistic trajectories, not wandering blips moving slower than a sports car. The operator on duty relied on software to prioritize threats, and that software dismissed anything too slow as noise. When the first warning came through a secondary channel showing unknown movement, the console's automatic classifier turned red, then green again. By the time the operator manually rechecked the feed, those faint dots had already crossed into a blind belt. Ukraine's engineers had studied these reaction patterns. They knew the S-400's missiles, particularly the 48N60M type, depended on semi-active radar homing. That meant once the missile launched, its internal seeker didn't track by itself. The ground radar had to keep the target illuminated, reflecting energy back for guidance. Every second of that illumination mattered. The drones waited for a lock prompt before beginning their counter motion. As soon as the missiles fired, the drones dropped altitude, entering an arc designed to fall below the radar horizon. Just as the interceptors reached their mid-flight, in that instant, the curvature of the Earth became Ukraine's shield. The radar beams traveling in straight lines could no longer follow the curve down to the low-flying drones. The missiles, blind and searching for guidance that no longer existed, kept closing on the last recorded coordinate. At roughly 2 kilometers from impact, the dead zone opened, an area too close and too low for the ground radar to maintain tracking accuracy. Predictive filters tried to calculate motion based on previous speed and direction, but expected aerodynamic behaviors that heavy aircraft would show. Smooth climbs, steady vectors. The drones, however, jerked erratically and changed speed, breaking those predictions. Data decayed inside the algorithms. The angle of interception drifted, and both missiles self-detonated 20 seconds later over empty fields. The operator saw 2 bright flashes on the monitor, marked as successful engagements, but seconds later, new fire signatures appeared precisely where the system claimed nothing existed. The first explosions inside the Raisin oil refinery tore through columns of storage tanks. Flames roared upward, liquefying pipelines, consuming the structure in a 1,200-degree blaze that would burn for 72 hours. Emergency crews could not approach the site until the 3rd day, by which time Moscow's fuel supply had dropped nearly 40%. The economic repercussions rippled almost instantly. Rationing alerts, transport delays, and a quiet panic within Russia's energy ministry over how a handful of drones could outwit a multi-billion-dollar defense grid. While investigators scoured radar logs trying to identify what had gone wrong, Ukrainian planners were already working on their next experiment. Their focus shifted from exploiting radar's blind zones to manipulating what radar saw. The next operation wouldn't rely on stealth or speed. It would hinge on deception, and the cheapest material in any hardware store was about to cost Russia millions. What if the cheapest object in a hardware store could bankrupt your air defense in seconds? That question turned real on a cool April night when 12 Ukrainian drones left the border region, heading 500 kilometers east toward another major Russian refinery. Their route followed a cluster of low clouds, giving them cover from optical sensors. 4 of the drones abruptly rose to 500 meters, far higher than the others, activating small radar reflectors on their sides. To the Russian radar network watching, they suddenly looked enormous, projecting signatures that matched the shape and intensity of a Kh-101 cruise missile, the same type designed to strike strategic infrastructure at supersonic speed. At the Russian control center supervising the nearest refinery defense grid, warning tones echoed as the Panzer S-1 radar units began sorting the feed. Prioritization software instantly flagged the incoming objects as high-value threats. Dozens of interceptor pods swiveled skyward, locking onto the bright radar echoes returning from the 4 climbing drones. Within 12 seconds, 857 E-6 missiles were launched in waves, streaking upward in white arcs. Each missile cost about $250,000 to manufacture, arm, and maintain. Every rocket that left the rail represented the price of an average Moscow apartment. But the targets were not cruise missiles. They were decoys, shaped by careful geometry and a few strips of aluminum. At the core of this deception was the corner reflector principle. Each drone carried 3 thin aluminum panels arranged at right angles, forming a triangular corner that bounced radar energy directly back to its source. That simple structure created what engineers call a retro-reflection. The waves that struck its surface returned precisely along the incoming path with amplified intensity. A 10-centimeter reflector could produce a return signature equal to that of a 10-square-meter aircraft section. The effect was enough to make a hand-launched drone look like a full-size bomber on a radar screen. The simplicity belied the sophistication of the trick, exploiting the physics that radar systems rely upon for target identification. Inside the Russian launch center, the display bloomed with echoes. Operators saw not 4 distinct objects, but more than a dozen signatures merging, splitting, and duplicating mid-air. Ghost targets appeared where none existed. Tracking systems struggled to process the overload, assigning new designations every second. The radar's filtering algorithms, built to refine and clarify, had no framework to separate a legitimate missile from a bright reflector flare. To the computers, every reflected signal looked authentic, and every authentic one looked questionable. As interceptors exploded into the air, the real drones, flying much lower, continued quietly at treetop level in radio silence. 5 minutes later, while the radar crews celebrated what they thought was a perfect interception, the true swarm reached the refinery perimeter from the opposite direction. The explosion of the first tank corridor triggered an enormous plume of smoke visible for nearly 30 kilometers. The cost balance of the battle was staggering. Russia had just burned through roughly $3 million worth of missiles, chasing metallic triangles that cost less than a takeout coffee. Each tiny reflector, priced under $5, had multiplied its effect thousands of times over by forcing interception reactions that were faster, louder, and entirely pointless. The deeper failure was not financial, though. It was cognitive. The defense systems were built to identify complexity, to measure heat signatures, frequencies, and trajectories with surgical precision. Yet simplicity broke them. The reflectors offered no variable patterns to analyze, no electronic noise to filter, only pure, mirrored energy. Algorithms designed to interpret chaos could not handle uniform reflections. The more the radar tried to calculate, the more convinced it became that the decoys were real. The $3 million decoy story is less about drones than about control over information. Ukraine turned radar perception into a weapon, proving that sight itself can be manipulated. When defense missiles responded to illusions, they revealed that data, not firepower, now defines strength on the battlefield. Future wars will be won by those who make their enemies chase ghosts instead of targets. Technology, deception, and economics emerging into one continuous fight for awareness. The side that controls what the opponent believes will control the outcome long before the first missile launches or the first alarm sounds.